Render cache. Do we still need it anymore? First of all, let's recap a little bit about what the render cache is for and what it does. This is from my interpretations of it. It may not be 100% correct, but the idea is when you have a sequence in here, you hit the render button. It will render all of these effects and basically translate the effect into what data needs to be sent to the pixels. That's a lot of work because it's got to go through all of these effects and all of the layers and all of the models, etc. So the thinking was when this was originally coded that if we could save all of these little renders in files on your file system, we wouldn't have to have the computer recalculate them each time. Well, it seems effects and sequences have changed considerably since the first days of xLights, and what used to be advantageous, i.e., a render cache, is no longer advantageous as it once was. We're seeing, especially on the Mac side of things, a render can be done in a few seconds. It actually is faster to do it through the CPU than it is to read the files off the render cache. And in fact, even on the PC environment, it's very similar to that too. Um, the advantages now of a render cache are pretty much negligible. Um, let me show you an example here. So here's a typical Bluey sequence. It's got a large number of effects considering what what we used to have. When you create a render for this, it's going to build a render cache on your system. Let's recap here. First of all, render cache. Let's go back to preferences and go to sequences, render cache. So render cache is enabled here, but we also have a maximum of 20 gigabytes. You could change the size, and this is where it gets interesting because some people have render cache and it's filling up their hard drive. And we'll talk about that in a second. So we have render cache enabled. It's set to maximum 20 gig. If I click render now, it will go through the render and create the render cache. Rather than make you wait, I've already done it. And I'm going to bring over here. This is my render cache. You see it creates a file with the sequence name and the word render cache on it. If I open it up, you're going to see this big monstrosity. Every effect, let me see if I can make this bigger. Every effect and every layer creates a file. So you got, we have a butterfly effect on the fourth layer starting at time 36,100 milliseconds. And every effect in the sequence is creating a file. So you can see there's already a large number of files. I think it says down here 533 files. So we're forcing xLights to read all of those files in efforts to save you milliseconds in the render time. So let's back up one folder. We can right click on the folder. It's nearly 2.5 gigabytes. So we said the maximum, if you recall in the preferences, was 20. So I could do less than 10 sequences and I would already use up 20 gigabytes. So um, if you have it set to 20, which I think is the default, once you reach the 20 gigabyte limit, it's going to start and remove those render cache files. So all that effort you spend to write the render cache files, they'll be deleted for you anyway. So it's like, why did I bother to create them? By the way, I looked at the code and render cache is deleted based on timestamp, but it's also got an overriding deletion in there that says if a render cache file is overly large, it gets deleted first. But so there you go. You're creating a large number of files, using up a lot of your disk space. You probably don't have render cache um, size big enough that it's going to be available for you when you need it. And it, it, it doesn't buy you that much time in rendering, in saving. So why bother creating them in the first place? Well, there's probably a couple scenarios where you might want to do it. If you're a sequencer and you are going to be sitting in the sequence, tweaking this sequence over and over and over again, then that's probably a good time to at least consider using render cache. But if you're a mapper, which is what we sort of nickname people nowadays, you likely are buying or acquiring your sequences from the various free sources as well. you're not doing a lot of tweaking to the sequence itself. You're just basically loading it in, you're mapping it, making a couple of minor changes, you render it, you save it, you go on to the next one. Or you've got your sequence done and you may be tweaking your layout a little bit, the channels, the controllers. And quite frankly, if you're doing all that, you might end up having to re-render anyway because you've tweaked the models, you've tweaked the layout, you tweaked the group sizes and the group contents. So again, all that time you've spent saving all those files is not buying you anything on on the next render. So don't bother creating it anyway. So I'll leave it up to you to do some tests, see if it's worth your while. I'm finding that what we used to suggest setting up the render cache for performance improvements is really not beneficial anymore. But if you do have it, you're going to want to make sure it's on fast disk. You're going to want to keep an eye on the size of the files, the size of the of your folders to see if it's gotten, um, overly large. There's no harm in deleting it. If you have a render cache and you see there's old stuff in there, you can delete it. There is a function here, tools, purge render cache should be here. Purge render cache is there. Note that if you have um, preferences, if you disable your render cache, click OK, the render cache will still be on your hard drive, but you've basically taken the ability, oh, you can still purge it. Okay, I thought you can, well, can you? No, you can't. Um, so if you have it disabled, you won't be able to delete your render cache. So what you might want to do is go into Preferences, make it enabled, click OK, then do your tools and purge your render cache that way. And then you can go and disable it. But I'm going to leave it up for you guys to decide whether it's good for you or not. I'm thinking 2025 is the end of the render cache going forward. Do not use it. That's my opinion. And let me know in the comments what you decide to do. Talk to you later.